the nation teetered on the brink of chaos. In response to escalating tensions and mounting threats, President Taraxia took an unprecedented step. With a somber expression, he signed an executive order declaring martial law. The order was met with a mix of shock, fear, and outrage. Across the country, citizens grappled with a new reality. Law enforcement officers received new directives, while military personnel prepared for deployment on United States soil. The streets, once bustling with everyday life, now buzzed with the ominous presence of armed soldiers and military vehicles. The executive order outlined the scope and provisions of martial law in chilling detail. It granted President Taraxia sweeping powers, including the suspension of habeas corpus and other civil liberties. The justification was clear. The nation faced a grave national emergency. After all, these threats presented a clear and present danger to both national security and public safety, Taraxia asserted, and this left him no choice but to take drastic action to restore order. The order allowed for curfews, mass surveillance, and the use of military force to quell unrest. It painted a picture of a nation at war with itself, with internal threats deemed as dangerous as any foreign enemy. Taraxia's administration defended the measures as necessary to protect the nation from descending into anarchy. In cities and towns across America, the immediate effects of martial law were felt. Curfews were imposed, streets were patrolled by soldiers, and surveillance cameras seemed to multiply overnight. The suspension of habeas corpus meant that citizens could be detained indefinitely without charge. Freedom of speech was curtailed, with dissenting voices quickly silenced. Concerns over the erosion of civil liberties grew louder. Legal scholars warned of the dangerous precedent being set, while civil rights activists organized underground resistance. The suspension of fundamental rights, they argued, was a betrayal of the very principles the nation was built upon. The deployment of the National Guard and federal troops brought a heavy-handed response to civilian unrest. Protests erupted in defiance of curfews, with crowds chanting for the restoration of democracy and the end of martial law. Clashes between military forces and civilians became a common sight, each confrontation escalating the tension further. Soldiers found themselves in an ethical quagmire, torn between following orders and their duty to protect the citizens. Stories of dissent within the ranks emerged, with some soldiers refusing to enforce draconian measures against their fellow Americans. The declaration of martial law dominated media coverage. Mainstream outlets reported from the front lines of protests, capturing the raw emotion and violence that unfolded. Social media became a battleground of its own, with viral videos and impassioned posts shaping public opinion. Pundits and commentators debated the implications of martial law. Some supported the president's actions as necessary to restore order, while others condemned it as a gross overreach of executive power. International observers voiced their concern, warning that the erosion of democratic norms in the United States could have far-reaching implications for global stability. Legal challenges to the martial law declaration were swiftly filed in federal courts. Civil liberties organizations argued that the executive order was unconstitutional, violating the core principles of freedom and democracy. The legal battles reached the Supreme Court, where justices deliberated on the limits of executive power and the constitutional safeguards against tyranny. As the nation held its breath, the Supreme Court prepared to issue its ruling. The tension was palpable, with the fate of American democracy hanging in the balance. Would the court uphold the president's sweeping powers, or would it strike down the declaration as an affront to the Constitution? Political pundits began to worry that the president would stack the court by adding a few of his longtime allies to the nation's existing roster of Supreme Court justices. Even the slowest-minded citizens of our formerly great nation could now see the country grappling with profound questions of democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. The decisions made in the wake of martial law would shape the future of the United States, testing the resilience of its democratic institutions and the resolve of its people alike.